If you've already used Caddie's AEC tools, whether just for drawing plans, inserting doors, windows and openings and so on, or whether you want the full 3D model to show your clients, then you'll have seen just how quick and easy these tools are to use. But what happens when you want to create a new wall style, a wall style that's particular to you? Creating new walls in Caddie is fabulously easy. We can do it graphically, so we don't need to be a math genius, just defining where our baseline is, so it makes it easy to set out these walls, picking the offsets that we've drawn with just simple lines, choosing hatch that we want to fill the components, and generating our AEC wall for us. We can even go on to define how the Endcaps work, defining what happens to each component when we insert doors, windows, openings, or even just finish a wall. And we can do this once again simply by drawing, in this case polylines, to define how each component of our new wall is terminated at doors, windows and openings, or even the wall end. So let's take a look at how we can transform a simple collection of lines and hatch into a fully fledged AEC wall that we can use for all our modelling needs. So the first step in creating our AEC wall is to draw a line. So we go to the Lines menu and Auto, and we'll just create a simple line. Now we could do offsets from this, but I'm going to choose the Parallel Multi tool, which will allow me to define all of the offsets in one, including the pen colours that I wish to use. So we're doing it incrementally, and you can choose however many offsets you want to apply. So we'll do 13mm for plasterwork, 100mm for the block, 60mm for the insulation, 40 for the cavity, and 102 for the brickwork. So OK that, we're using continuous lines there, and we just point on the top side of our line. Quick regen, and we can see that we have all of those lines created. And having defined our lines, we can now move on to define the hatches we wish to use. So we come down to our hatch tools, we'll set up the hatch as we wish to use it. So we could go for the patterns here, we could even go to the name presets. So if you go block in plan, load that. We could change the colour if we wish. I'm going to choose to change to a white pen here, just so that it stands out a little bit more on the screen. And we'll do a rectangle of hatch, and we'll just put in a little bit of a swatch there. We can go back to the settings, brick in plan this time. So if we just brick in plan, load that. Again, just going to choose a different pen so that it stands out a little bit. I might even just change the settings for the plot scale as well. So we'll drop in our hatch there, and then we can define something for the insulation. We could do this as a pattern again, but this time, just to be a little different, we'll go for a fill. So we'll choose a pen. So we'll go for a colour 51 here, and then OK to that. So there are our hatches defined as well. So having defined our walls by setting up offsets and then including just simple hatch, we can now go to the AEC Wall tools under the AEC drop down and call in create a wall style from lines. So here we are. It says ensure that all lines are horizontal, indicate the components of the wall starting with the bottom and working upwards. Okay, fairly straightforward and simple. We can also indicate a baseline. So if we were creating a wall which was going to allow us to define the setting out point by the blockwork, say, we could do that. So we'll choose that as our setting out point. We could create a wall that has a specific name, so new wall, and we could apply that. And then we simply pick the lines in order, working from the bottom to the top. And you see it actually indicates what we've picked by creating it there in our preview. We don't want to finish just yet, not the whole command at least, because we want to add some hatches. So we do a right click option end. It says, would you like to allocate the hatches? Well, yes we would. So we type yes, Y and enter. We don't want anything for our component 0 here, and we'll see it highlighted in pink. So we'll just enter on that, which takes it up to the next component. So here we'll just indicate our hatching. It moves on to the next one. Again, nothing for the cavity, but then we do want hatching for the brickwork. Having defined that, we can now determine how the components interact when they cross other components. This again is just a selection process. So component 0 is our plaster. So for component 1, which is the blockwork, component 2, which is our insulation, component 3, which is our air gap, and then finally component 4, which is our brickwork. And you'll see that they have numbers assigned to them. The lower the number, the higher the priority given to the component. So we can finish our wall. It is now created. And having created our wall, we can now use the AEC Wall command to actually draw with that wall style. So let's just zoom out a little bit, so give ourselves a little bit of free space. We can go to our AEC tools, choose wall, and we'll see that the new wall, along with any other styles in there, within the drawing are in there. We can say the height. We can choose whether we want to draw the wall with the origin as the left, center, right, or baseline, and simply picking a point here. So I'll just type in some distances. So 2 meters to the right, 2 meters down, 2 meters again to the right, and then simply go to place doors, windows automatically, moving them around, choosing our walls, extending them, using them as we would any of the predefined wall styles. Taking a closer look at our newly created AEC wall and having inserted a window, we'll see that the wall finishes with a clean break line at the opening created for the window. What we can do, however, is introduce an endcap detail other than standard, which will define how each component terminates at that junction. So let's have a look at what we might want to achieve there. Taking a closer look at our newly created AEC wall and having inserted a window, we'll see that the wall finishes with a clean break line at the opening created for the window. What we can do, however, is introduce an endcap detail other than standard, which will define how each component terminates at that junction. So taking a closer look at how we may wish to finish off each particular component of our wall when we inserted, say, a door or a window, we can actually introduce things such as wraparound plasterwork. And here the distance from the top to the bottom would be the same as the return on the brickwork there, or the blockwork in this case. And that is component 0, our plasterwork. What we'll also find is that if we take a look here, we'll see that this distance back is actually effectively something added onto the wall in its creation to provide then the 0 line where the door or window will be inserted. So when we introduce component 1, we have a U shape, so it effectively extends from that line to the end, to that 0 line for our blockwork. Component 2, much shorter this time, which will trim back the insulation back into the length of the wall there. Component 3 is our thermal closer, and component 4 is our brickwork. Taking a closer look at our thermal closer, we'll see that it is a single continuous polyline that has no breaks or crossings. And we can also employ thickness, so we'll see the different thicknesses of the segments here. Different thicknesses, 0 will actually show in the finished drawing, anything other than 0 will not show, but will still go to define our end cap. So taking a look at what we have here, we have a series of polylines which are drawn anti-clockwise, which define how we want each component to work. Having created the polylines, we can simply go to the AEC tools, the drop down there, go to walls, and create the closer detail. So this not only creates a closer detail, it also applies it to our chosen wall. So here we're being asked to indicate the wall. We can give it a name, so we can call it closer 1. We can apply it to windows, doors and DWAs, openings and wall ends too if we wish, and there's a pick option here. So if we pick on that, simply zoom into here, so this is our offset, so that's the distance there. We'll turn it into a minus figure so that it wraps around the inside of the reveal. OK to that, we'll go back to where we were in terms of our view, and it says component number 0. So this is component number 0. We just need to enter on that to accept it. Pick on that, and we can see that it's creating the closer detail as we see in front of our eyes. So component 1, and so that's introduced now. Component 2, component 3, and then component 4, and our end cap is complete and applied. So when we take a look at our wall again, we notice that the end caps have already been included because we define those end caps for those particular instances in that wall type. So just taking a look in here, we'll see that the thermal closure is included, the insulation's cut back, and we have the wraparound for the plasterwork. Taking a step back from our wall and just going to a constrained orbit and having a look at what we have in 3 dimensions, we'll see that our wall, although defined in 2D with the hatching and so on, doesn't have any materials for the 3rd dimension for our model. So what we can do is define those. Now, if you don't want to set up your own materials, that's fine. You can incorporate them very quickly and easily by going to the Wall Styles, going to the Save Presets, and just picking on one of the predefined walls and clicking Load, because all the materials will be defined for there in that particular wall. You don't need to draw a wall. We can then simply escape from that, pick onto our new wall, edit the wall style, go to Materials, and we'll see we have the components here. So if we choose for component 1, we'll say 0, sorry, wall.plaster, then we'll have our wall.block, we'll have our insulation, our cavity, and then finally we'll have our brickwork. Apply that, close the dialog, and we'll see that we have the materials defined. Taking another look at using a constrained orbit, just twizzle around our wall and do a regen, we see all those materials are defined. So as we see, just using simple lines, we can then use the AEC tools under walls to create a wall from line styles, so just simple lines on a page, and then create an end cap closer detail, and also assign materials just by editing the properties of our wall once it's created.